Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we're looking at Klevgrand's Svep. I don't know how you pronounce that. It's an IKEA kind of thing, I think. Klevgrand are an interesting developer, and I'm going to be really upfront in that this isn't my kind of product. I work from a list. I tend to dismiss things that I just can't see any value in at all, or I'm not going to be able to be positive about. Some things there is more encouragement to do than others. This was one that I did choose out of the list without any extra encouragement. The last one we did was the Acon Multiply, which is a kind of chorus. But the thing that I missed in it and mentioned was that it wasn't versatile in the sense that it was versatile within what it did, but it wasn't versatile in the sense that it didn't offer flanging and phasing and what have you, the normal modulation effects. So I thought, well, okay, it'd be nice to do one video after that covers all of the holes that Multiply doesn't cover because of its nature. This one claims to be a phaser, a flanger, and a chorus, and it kind of is. But the interesting thing with Klevgrand also is that they make a point of saying how different they are and that they are reimagining the interface and process. And I'll say, yeah, I think they are. But a lot of this is going to be around the question of, but does it work? To be very fair, obviously I don't really think it does, but also these seem to be primarily designed for iPads. And maybe this works better in that environment, but it's not an environment that I personally find conducive to work. Because for me, this is work, not just a reviewing, but whenever I'm making music, it is work. Even when I'm making my own music for my own albums, which are not exactly high reward, I see it as work. I always work as a professional. And so part of the question is this reimagining really going to help you achieve those outcomes? Now, some people are going to see very differently from the way that I do, and they are entitled to that. But it's part of why I'm being very clear about how and why I have a particular approach. And please don't just fire off hand grenades because you think differently. There's a reason behind this in the concept of professionalism. Professionalism being, I'm living at this. Yes, but that's the minor meaning of the word professional, really in the more emotive sense of professional being achieving a high, consistent standard of outcome. If you are a surgeon, you are considered to be professional. If you kill too many patients, you are considered unprofessional and most likely removed from your profession. In other words, you don't get to earn a living at it anymore because you are not professional enough. Your standards are not high enough. And that can even translate to softer aspects of your work, in that if your bedside manner is too off-putting for your patients, you can be considered unprofessional and find yourself needing to find another job, and, at least from the profession's point of view, the need to rearrange your bedside manner. That is the approach that I'm taking here. Does Klevgrand's different take deliver something which allows us to do more or better, or does it hobble their product? Now, again, I'm looking at this on a computer, which to me is the professional option, the professional way of doing this. Those that like playing with iPads, and they're going to go, but tactile's better, and that's a personal choice, a very personal choice. I acknowledge it, but I still don't necessarily see it as being the way that things get done. Alrighty. So how does it sound? I've got a couple of things set up, two different types of sound. One is a very Casio CZ sort of sound, because this is where I started. I started with a Casio CZ on my floor. This was after I was actually been training for some time in a commercial facility as a mix engineer, and I thought, well, I need some stuff to work on, and I've always been a bit interested in this synthesizer thing. Everyone else around here seems afraid of the synthesizers. I'm going to learn them. I'm like that. I'll pick the thing that everyone seems afraid of and go, I'm going to be good at that. And so I got myself a Casio CZ 1000, which I absolutely adored. And then down the pawn shop, I found myself a chorus and flanger pedal, 2 of them. And so I thought, let's go right back to basics. We've got this very dry CZ, brassy, stringy sort of sound. Let's bring in Svep. Obviously, it embiggens. Demo mode. We'll discuss it a little later. It obviously becomes bigger. So does it chorusy? Yes, it does. It then gets a little bit difficult as to how we get different results. Different results are definitely doable. We can change our speed. We can change our depth. Our balance. Whether this thing's running directly in mono or spread out into stereo. And this is a little different in that we can unlink. So left and right are now running separately from each other, or we can put them back together. And the last being the feedback. That's it. That's all it does. It sounds good, but as you may be noticing, it feels a little limited. Let's move to a more complex sound, which is based around the concept of something like a wave station type sound. This must have been left on the other screen. Let me go rescue it. There we go. Turn this off. So it's capable of sounding good, but again, the question comes down to, does it really work? Does it really deliver phases, flanges, and choruses? And is it very usable? One of the real things about the defining factor of a professional piece of equipment is that it's highly usable. A lot of times people seem to say that it's highly high fidelity. High fidelity and professionalism have always been two completely separate things. High fidelity is merely a technical thing. Does it move from X to Y with, the most perfection possible, achievable? Everything in digital does that. So it's irrelevant these days. Is it high fidelity? Of course it is, because everything is, or acceptably so. But in terms of gear, professional gear is the thing that lets us achieve the result that we're looking for. Now, different people will come in differently, and again, that's why I acknowledge people who play with little boxes, like, little cigar boxes with knobs on them all cobbled together on their desk. For them, that's how they feel like they achieve their thing. Fair enough. What exactly they're achieving, I sometimes question, but they feel like they're achieving their thing, so fair enough. I'm working from the other angle, of the true professional angle of those who are having to do this for a living and need to be able to get specific results. That's my question here. Can this really help us do it? Let's look at Clevgrand. This is the beginning of the site. I have narrowed this down into a phone type shape because it does very much appear that everything about them is aimed towards phones, pads, what have you. I've already commented on what I see there in terms of professional or otherwise. We start with swirly and sweepy, not too creepy. Okay, it's cute. It is cute. It's a bit of a laugh. The display, the image that we get from the product, well, it's a little like meeting Dolly Parton just out of the shower. It's amusing. SVEP, Phaser Flanger Chorus. Okay, whatever your modulations may be, this plugin will take care of it. Grand claim. Really grand claim. Okay, fair enough, it's marketing. Swirly and sweepy, not too creepy. Funny marketing. Whatever it is, this plugin will take care of it. That's part of what we got to put to the test. Will it really do everything? Or will it kind of fall over itself? The next thing that we see is that there's this video where a guy is poking his iPad and drinking a beer. They make a point of showing the beer be handed to him and of him drinking it. This is not my idea of professionalism. Now, maybe the company is merely saying very clearly this is not for the likes of you. It seems to be saying it's for the likes of people with big bushy beards that they stroke all the time and headphones that are far sexier looking than these things, which I only use for screen recordings. Fair enough. That's, I guess, them targeting, and the fact that I look at it and go, yeah, that's not how one would do these things. But some people will say, oh, but Benedict, you're a stick in the mud. A personal opinion. And then we're presented with this. This turns out to be the RTFM. It simply has some numbers on the screen and says, well, this does this, this does this, this does this. So in actual fact, we've really only got 3 main controls and 2 sub-controls, which we'll run over again in the walkthrough, which may be a little limited. And I gotta say, it's necessary. Because if I didn't see those things, I'd have absolutely no concept or no idea how to use this at all. I guess, again, the kind of user for this, the person who's going to be poking their iPad in a beer garden, is probably going to be watching the video for a few seconds and going, yep, got it, and moving along. So they're not even going to read that RTFM. So I'm not going to say that Clevergrand's doing it wrong for their business, but I'm going to ask, are they really providing what I believe is needed to do what I will term as a highly professional job, which is versatile and the ability to dial in very clearly and precisely the results that you look for, versus is this just essentially a game? It is free, but you do need a license. As you saw where this is in, it's asking for a license number and it's staying in demo mode, so we will hear dropouts. It's free, so you'll ask, well, but why didn't you go get the license? It's free. Because, well, obviously if you haven't worked it out, it is not for me. I'm going to be as fair as I can to both sides, but without selling out who I am and what I do. There are interesting things about this, and the experiment of the Dolly Parton interface is interesting. I'm just not sure whether it really works out. So we'll run through my good and bad. It does sound good. Off and on. Let's make sure we've got the right one on. Its core sound is fundamentally good. There's nothing wrong with that. So yes, it sounds good. If you want to say, does it sound pro? Well, yes, but as I've already said, everything sounds pro if we are defining pro as high fidelity, as in it goes from X to Y clearly on its frequency plot. Yes, it does that, and you can get some good sounds from it. They say it's a flanger, a chorus, and a phaser. Okay, apparently it does all of those things. If you feel like you're getting those results, again, that's good. I'm question marking that because I don't really think that we have any definition there about which of these we're actually achieving at any given point in time. Now, I am completely open to the fact that there is a big fuzzy blob that is chorusing, flanging, or flanging, chorusing, and phasing, that they can very comfortably all live within the one box, and there's no actual defined point at which one becomes another. And they're trading in that space, but the problem is that if you're looking for distinctly one rather than another, it's very hard to actually be in one more than another. And for some people, this will be a real positive, especially those the sort of finger on the iPad crowd. They will go, wow, this is amazing, this unique interface, it's so different, it's so like more tactile and what have you. I'm not interested in tactile myself, but it is a thing that would appeal to them. So again, I've got a question mark. It's a plus for certain people. Unfortunately, it's a minus for me. Bad, oddly enough, I've put no presets. Normally I'm the guy railing against presets. And here I go, there are no presets. The reason that I was interested to look at some presets was to see how they say this is operating as a chorus, how they say this is operating as a flanger, how this is operating as a phaser. There isn't any, because it's just, they will say a continuum from here to there, but I think it's just doing all of them at once. I think it's a flanger and nothing but a flanger, which naturally in certain situations can behave like a chorus and in other situations will seem like a phaser, but it doesn't really separate itself out. I'd say it's a flanger. The big problem I've got is that it's poor and very limited control, which we will cover later. That to me takes it completely out of professional and 100% into my last point, that it's a novelty. It is free, and it does seem like all their products to be primarily aimed at the iPad market. The fact that we can run it in our DAW seems sort of secondary, and yet at the same time it is marketed as though it is a, along with everything else. And fair enough, that's their business. But ultimately, to me, it collapses under a very poor, limited amount of control, which leaves it just being a novelty. Let's look through this. Again, this is a point of view, and I'm sticking with this because, yes, it does sound good and you can get some interesting results from it. You can even hit some of those classic kinds of sounds. Great. But also to be able to have that question around this is to understand that there is a reason why gear of yore, the classic things with the knobs, 12 buttons and 12 knobs, was built this way so that it gives us that amount of control, and that trying a different approach is great. It is good. We need to try different approaches. I'm constantly railing against the things like, say, the Capital Mastering Compressor, that it was just so stuck in the past, where there would have been a lot more flexibility, a lot more options if they'd simply said, let's start with what works well on the computer. This may well be a great interface for the iPad, especially if you're laying it out in amongst your various other, desktop cigarette box gadgets, all gadgeted together with little patch cords and what have you. This could sit there in the middle of that and seem kind of cool. So I'm not blind to the fact that there are possibly advantages, just in the question of, does it work? Does it help me as a professional do my job and achieve things as well as or better than? Because otherwise, if it doesn't do it better than, why would I buy it? And that's where I'm falling into a great big, I'm sorry guys, it isn't working at. Let's walk through. We've really done this already. There is kind of nothing here. We'll pop back to the CZ emulation version, simply because it's clearer and simpler. Therefore, you can hear changes a little easier. Off, on. As I showed, you can unlink, so each of these can be handled separately. That is a little different. Most choruses don't offer us that, so that's a thing to be aware of. Is it a super necessary thing? No, but there are times where it will be interesting in terms of a mix. If you want it to have a different feel, or you want your sound to feel a little different on one side of the mix rather than the other without just being lazy and panning it, then this is a way of doing that. We've got more activity on one side, and it does just change the stereo interaction. So interesting. When that's on, obviously we lose our stereo, mono to stereo slider. That's just the LFO that's controlling the pair of them operating together or offset. Right, when you grab this thing, yeah, if you haven't read their site or looked at their little beer drinking video, then you'd have absolutely no idea of where to go and what to do. That to me is a fail, because a device should give you a sense of what it's going to do. Okay, I get that people who don't understand what a chorus is, how it works, how it functions, might look at a row of knobs and buttons and go, well, I don't know how to use that. But is that the fault of the manufacturer, the developer, the UI expert who put it together, or is that the fault of the user who doesn't know how to do their craft? I think this obscures that, which will please some, but it doesn't please, I think, the professional mindset. So we've got the first thing that you're more likely to find yourself grabbing is this. This is the feedback knob, which goes from nothing to a safe amount, which is not in the howling feedback. Unable to turn itself off kind of arena. So not a lot of movement, and then we start to get into the pointy but not howling out of control thing. I figure if you're going to be wild, then give us howling out of control. Then here, I still get the same thing. This is obviously meant to do something, but it's still that. I have to grab this bit in the middle. And this is where it gets like, WTF. It does improve with a bit of practice, but not really. Quite simply, if you're dragging purely left-right, it changes the rate. And if you're dragging purely up-down, that's interesting, I'm getting some little clicks, wouldn't expect that. Then it changes the depth. So rate, depth. And while on the surface it sounds really clever, it's incredibly hard to actually control. I'm never getting a nice lush chorus from this thing. Okay, we can move it out into stereo. It is nice that it's given us a slider which goes from our LFO moving exactly like this to exactly opposites. It's hard to do them sort of off kilter with each other, but that's nicer than just a straight button. Hard stereo can be a little too obvious. Somewhere in between will give us a still centered, but a nice amount of stereo. Putting it right out on the edges gives us that really wide thing, but then can be a real problem in the mix. So somewhere in the middle is better because you've still got your point. So if we pan this, it will feel more natural and your instrument will still feel centered. So, okay, nice to have that. But we've got to remember that all our changes, we have to hit the plus button. And getting this somewhere where it feels like we're getting a smooth, lush chorus just feels difficult. And then we've got dry, wet control. Now, you can get to places where you go, oh yeah, that's quite nice. But as we'll look at later, it's really hard to get there with any sense of precision. Again, we'll go back to the idea of a surgeon. When watching The Good Doctor, Dr. Sean Murphy has to be very precise with where he sticks his tool. Otherwise, the person's going to get and bleed out on the table, and it's all very dramatic until he comes up with a better solution. A surgeon has to be precise. A professional sound engineer, yes, there are times where we're looking for happy accidents, But this seems to be all about happy accidents rather than the ability to be precise. And that's the problem that I've got, or one of the problems that I've got, that we lack precision, or the only problem really, that we lack precision in this interface. Now maybe it's an interface that seems to make sense, and it does take advantage of the touchiness of the iPad and the fact that it can be amusing, but it's more of a computer game than it is of delivering great results. I really struggle to feel like I'm getting a nice chorus. But again, it does kind of sound like a flanger, and I think that all it ever is a flanger, and that it needs more controls. I think it needs at least one, if not two more controls to be able to actually deliver everything that it claims that it does do properly. Again, yes, it does a little bit of all of those, but every modulation device like this does a little bit of those. That's the walkthrough, that's everything it does. So again, it's now about the does it work. So we'll keep this guy open and on. Let's see if we can get a nice chorus. It goes from and we will go flip on a chorus here. This is just using these as controls. We'll just use the more depth and rate. And we get sort of the same results. But as you see, when we move the delay, which is where the second voice starts, it's the delaying and then the modulation that makes this work. A lack of delay, you get through what's called a through zero. And that has its charms as a phaser. It's easier to get those kinds of results here because I can obviously know through training that some of the issue that we've got over here with the SVEP is that they've preset this initial delay amount, and it's not necessarily suited to the situation in which I am working. And which is why generally you're going to have this third control. They've only given us these two controls, but this control here is actually really very important to a chorus. Without it, it's hard to find the balance at which this sound is going to achieve the result that the song is looking for. Not that I'm looking for, well, I guess I am, but I want my song to feel a certain way, or the song wants to feel a certain way. If we're trying to transform this rather rigid CZ stringy brassy sort of sound, we've got to find the right points, and these extra controls allow us to get there. And see, even at full width and dry wet balance, it's sounding good because I'm able to dial in with precision professionally. This seems like it's sort of the same, but it's every time I try to make adjustments, I just can't find the point at which it's going to be delivering that result. Now, I've said this seems far more like a flanger, so comparing it to a chorus is probably unfair, but they put chorus on it. So let's move to a flanger. turn out Mr. Svep. Again, lots of knobs and buttons here. Here's a default for our flanger. So we can set our, well, it says here frequency, but that is our delay time from long to short. And here how we're getting that sort of nasal type sound. This is our depth. And this is our rate. See how there's a lot of versatility or a lot of movement here throw on the slow movements and plenty on the fast ones. So depending upon what we want to achieve. But a lot of the sound comes from this delay, the initial delay period. Yes, it is oddly referred to as frequency, but it is still technically correct. And the fact that it is a big button tells us that, a big knob tells us that this is pretty fundamental to the process. If we want a big sweep, we've also got the ability to run through lots of different shapes. I'll totally bypass the fact that there's an envelope and what have you. That's unnecessary to get into. But that row of knobs, the extra controls, the extra couple of controls that this has got, allows us to have more control and dial in the sound that we want or need. So yes, this is somewhere between flanger and chorus, but that just means we've got to lengthen our time. And I can dial in all those things because I've got extra knobs, so it's extra parameters to be able to control things, particularly this initial delay time, and that each of these knobs is discrete. Unfortunately, with the one move your finger around the iPad whilst drinking and stroking your beard approach, while very cool, undoes the needs of being able to be precise about where we stick our scalpel, lest we actually just create something that we didn't want. And that's the frustration that I feel with Svep here, as I'm dragging around not being able to find what I want, and the precision becomes less and less. I can't actually get to where I would want to be. Does Svep sound good? Yes, it does, within the confines of what it does do, and it is free. But this approach is what I'm testing, because this is across really all of their devices. And unfortunately, I can't make it work. This has been interesting looking into, if not actually very infuriating, but still interesting to look into and be able to compare, particularly these two devices and go, well, okay, how can I get them to be achieving the same results? And to discover that, well, I just can't get the same results. I can clone Svep with Sweeper, but I can do things with Sweeper that I can't clone with Svep. So proving to myself again that there is advantage in these sorts of architectures that have more knobs and buttons, provided they're well thought out. The reason I went with Reason was twofold. One is that their devices are almost always very well thought out, and I wasn't deliberately going with ones that I've designed, like either one of my personal ones or the higher hertz things like Hertz Delay or Hertz Multiplier, was deliberately not using as the contrast here to try to make sure that it doesn't seem like I know what I'm doing better than those Clevergrand people, because that is not my approach. My approach is simply to say, does this new approach get us there? You could say, well, it's just that device, dude. You're not very good with that device. Okay, fair enough. Fair call. Let's move to one there are other devices. I did open this up because it's like, oh, that's pretty interesting, kind of cool. I think I may have to rescue this guy too. Actually, no, it's because I didn't turn him on. Then this one looks interesting. This is a payware one, and the concept of I love delays that make out reverbs, as anyone who follows me would know. So the concept of being able to lay these things out, again, presented with an iFad and somebody pushing his fingers along it, and it's like, ooh. So we've got this reverb, it's on a send, it's a little heavy-handed, so it's very easy to hear. Let's just turn Svet out. Sounds kind of cool. The theory being that you can insert things and drag them around. But again, it just feels really bulky. There's one of those funny little RTFMs, which is kind of, oh, well, if you don't understand it, then what are you doing here, kind of a mindset. And then you've got to try to work out how to do things. Yes, the little thing, the RTFM tells you, oh, you can use this and that, but this is just unintuitive. I can't work out easily how to get the results that I'm looking for. Now, if this was a radically different approach, I'd say, yeah, fair enough. But when I'm trying to drag these things around, like, oh, now it's not doing what I want. Oh, I have to change to this mode. Okay, I can drag it around. Now, with time, it gets easier. But look, I'm over here, and it's just still over there. It's like, dude, if this was my finger, why aren't you following my finger? It's like, this is weird ass. I can't actually achieve the results that I want easily. And there's no tooltip to help me to understand what that's going to be. I worked out over time that sort of becomes infinite, but I've never fully worked out what it is and how it behaves, and I have to keep going from sort of tool to tool. And there's a constant messing up whatever setting I had, and there I'm trying to make this bit here shorter. But as you see, all it wants to do is move around. And, well, all I want to do is swear at this thing. And I think they know this. It probably works better on the iFad, and hopefully this would follow my finger or what have you, but pain in the backside. And I think they know this, so they've just provided this kind of... But that's not professional. If I'm setting out to develop a certain type of space, and if you want to understand how spaces are developed, then there's a whole video here on reverb. Then in theory, this is kind of cool. But in practice, it just doesn't let me do the thing. So it's that thing that I think that overall, they've got things that sound nice, but are so limited in their usability, particularly on a real working environment, that we end up with more frustration than good. And yes, it's good for people to say, how can we try something different? But something different needs to actually allow us to access things better than we normally would. Yes, it perhaps seems like it's easier for people who haven't learnt their craft. They can sit there with their beard, stroking their beard, and just going, oh, look how amazing I am. But this is not the person you'd want operating on you as a surgeon. You know, somebody who's juggling whilst they're operating. It's not how Dr. Sean Murphy does it. So, yes, the product is interesting. And yes, if you are playing the iFad game, then maybe it's kind of cool. But I think even if I were doing that, I would still be hoping for something that gives me more conventional control. Otherwise, I'm just going to feel like, yeah, all I get is frustration of never being able to actually get the sound that I want. I get random sounds, but I don't get the one that I want. More importantly, I don't get the one that my song needs to actually deliver its story. So it just comes back over and over to interesting approach, potentially interesting sounds, but actually unusable. And I'm frustrated by that. The reason that I went ahead with this review was, again, not to specifically have a go at Clevergrand or any of their devices, but to look at this issue of gamification. That if we're doing music as a game, then these sorts of interfaces, Dolly Parton just out of the shower, well, they're probably very cool and very appropriate. I don't see music as a game. It never has been. It never will be. That's my character. That's who I am. I take it very, very seriously. I've had people have a go at me about that, but imagine walking up to Brian May from Queen or Freddie from Queen and going, "You take that too seriously." You could expect to just get punched. Definitely if you walked up to Mick Jagger and said, "Oh, dude, you take your music too seriously." I would expect you should get a punch in the nose for that, because it's an insult. Especially if you are claiming to be a musician and more cool than Freddie or Brian or Mick, and walk up to them and say, "Yeah, dude, you take your music too seriously." I mean, this is it's not how it goes. It's so unprofessional. That's why I'm struggling to find words for this. So it's that approach to say, what are you doing? If you're playing games, okay, something that looks like Dolly Parton out of the shower is probably amusing. And there's this sort of weird randomness going on that probably makes you feel somehow that this is cool. But if you're wanting to be in control of what you do, take the time, learn this approach where you have a mess of knobs and buttons, and take your time to understand how they work and why. There are a lot of articles through here on that, on delays, on choruses, on compression, all that sort of stuff. And then you're going to find that when you present with these knobs and buttons, rather than them seeing as random and absurd as this does to me, and that's why I'm showing this feeling of random and absurd, because I know how to use these, and this just diminishes what this is capable of. And because I'm able to get the same sounds out of the pair of these, I'm not specifically showing it here, but I spend time going, okay, can I replicate that? And I can get close enough that no one's going to notice the difference in a mix, or if they're just randomly hearing them on the radio, they're not going to go, that version has a different chorus in it. They're not going to notice the difference, meaning that they both have essentially the same guts. It could even be the same code made by the same people, both made by Sven. Don't know, don't care. It's the user interface and the two very discrete approaches that I wanted to approach here to say, yep, one is a game, the other is requiring more of you. But if you are going to be a professional, then you need to do that work, and these sorts of gamified approaches don't actually let you get to where you need to go. So Clevergrand, interesting and great that you're trying something different. Obviously your focus is the iPad and things. Understandably, we need to investigate, is there a way to get a better result in a different sort of environment? But as for, do I think we're winning with that? My opinion is, no, I don't think we're winning with that. Doesn't mean that I think that you should replace these all with things that look like clones of 1176s, because I think that's childish. But I do miss fundamental, clear controls that allow me to get exactly the things that I need. Alrighty. All right. I hope you have found some interest in this. I hope it's given you cause to maybe try and see the world a little bit differently from the way that you see it. Should you change your mind? Not necessarily. If you are struggling with what you're doing and the results that you're getting, should you change your mind? Maybe. Okay. Any feedback down below? Otherwise, get out there, have a play, and have a great day.